I've read a lot of autopsy reports, but some of them still keep me up at night. Sometimes it's because of the haunting stories of their deaths, and other times it's the condition of their bodies. Here are 7 of some of the most disturbing autopsies that I have read. Majority of them do have the victim's name included. However, if it was never released publicly, I will keep the name out for the sake of the family's privacy. Viewer discretion advised. This video is dealing with some very dark topics, including violent death. You will never forget this autopsy. It involves a violent death on a movie set, and you will never guess how it occurred. It wasn't a prop gun or stunt gone wrong. It wasn't even an actor who died. A crew member was hit by a speeding train. 9 years ago, the production of a biographical film called Midnight Rider was underway. The budget was low, and like most films, it began hemorrhaging money. This caused producer Randy Miller to make some terrible decisions. On February 20th, 2014, actors and crew members were sent out to a trestle bridge in Georgia to film a dream sequence. Most of them had no idea that they did not have permission to be there. They set up the scene, which included a hospital bed lying across the tracks. Before long, one of them noticed a huge freight train heading straight for them. They immediately began grabbing equipment and made a frenzied dash over the bridge, but they couldn't get the bed off of the tracks on time. The train struck the bed, which pushed a female crew member into the direct path of the train. When her autopsy was performed, her body was in bad shape. Both feet had been cleanly severed from her body, and she had sustained fatal internal injuries to her abdomen and head. There were numerous fractures, but the worst was to her skull. There were signs of traumatic brain injury, and lacerations were scattered everywhere. She died within a few short moments of impact with the train. Needless to say, this death should have never happened. This will give you an idea of what a massive crowd surge is capable of. Majority of deaths that occur from crowd crushes are caused by compression asphyxiation, which occurs when some form of external pressure cuts off the ability to breathe. It's a very panicked way to die. Depending on the size of the crowd, it can generate crushing forces that are far stronger than that of a hydraulic press. This autopsy was of a male in his 20s. The external examination revealed a lot of discoloration. The overall skin tone was red, and from the waist up, there were strong areas of purple petechia. This is a result of surface blood vessels rupturing before death, and it's common with asphyxiation and crushing injuries. Internally, it was obvious that the main compression point was his upper abdomen and chest. Every vital organ above this point was congested, meaning blood flow was restricted or likely cut off. Additionally, he had several fractures to his rib bones. His left lung lobe was collapsed with signs of bleeding. One of the fractured ribs perforated the tissue. Other mild injuries included a fractured nose, contusions to his arms and face, as well as a split lower lip, which may have happened during his desperate struggle to get free. Sadly, it was his complete inability to breathe that killed him. The term "don't drink the Kool-Aid" comes from this mass tragedy. In the 70s, a large group of members of the People's Temple followed their evil cult leader to a remote area of Guyana, South Africa known as Jonestown. They left their lives in America behind to build a commune to live and work. On November 18, 1978, things took a dark turn when over 900 members lined up to receive a cup of Flavor Aid specked with cyanide and medications. Armed guards stood watch, making it clear that there was no choice. Each one died an agonizing death by poisoning. Several more died by gunshot. Only 7 victims received an autopsy, but they had already been treated with embalming fluid to slow decay, and there was a large gap of time between their death and examination. Jim Jones, the cowardly leader, was too afraid to consume the poison after watching his flock endure their torturous ends. He had a gunshot entrance wound to his left temple that exited his right temple. His bottom teeth were stained with blood and skull fractured, but decomposition made it impossible to determine brain injury. Each poison victim technically had a cause of death listed as undetermined. However, some victims still had fluid with cyanide present in their stomach contents, and many had lips that were dyed the color of Flavor Aid, allowing the coroner to arrive at probable cyanide poisoning. A small percentage of victims had puncture marks indicating that they may have been held down and poisoned against their will. Photos of the bodies helped investigators to form theories as to who may have consumed it willingly and who tried to escape their fate. I can safely say that this was the most morbid autopsy that I've ever read. I've analyzed a couple of whichever postmortem reports, but this wasn't your average neighbor's chipper. This was an industrial model designed to chip trees whole that weighed around 72,000 pounds. It offered destruction that would transcend your worst nightmare. A 42-year-old male who worked for his family-owned business leaned too far forward while helping to usher a thick branch into the machine. His shirt became caught on the wood, resulting in him being pulled through. It was later revealed that he had several drinks prior to his shift. The man had not only become completely mangled into pieces of various sizes, but a small portion of his intestines were recovered. It appeared that he was disemboweled, but it likely occurred after death since he went through head first. Much of the organ had become shredded and mashed, resulting in it becoming stuck to the machine. The remains of his bones were similar to the state of bones ground up for cremation. Some fragments were found, but a lot of his skeleton was pulverized. The fragments found belonged to his sternum, pelvis, and femur, which is coincidentally the hardest bone in the body. Brain matter, human waste, and blood was recovered from various pieces of the chipper. In total, the recovered remains weighed just under 3 pounds. The man had weighed 204 pounds at his most recent medical appointment. His cause of death was multiple traumatic injuries. Just a friendly reminder that sharks do not typically seek out humans as a food source. Majority of attacks are cases of mistaken identity, and the odds are 1 in nearly 4 million. This case was an 18-year-old male, and there were witnesses to the attack which helped put the puzzle together. The man jumped into the ocean off the back of his friend's boat, and within moments, calamity struck. What appeared to be a great white snatched him in its mouth and tugged him under the water. Within seconds, a second shark appeared, and in a blink of an eye, it was as if they were fighting over his body. Still alive at this point, trying to flail and fight, both sharks began biting off chunks. Soon, the water was made murky by his blood. According to his friends, unrecognizable body parts occasionally bubbled to the surface, only to disappear quickly. What haunts me the most about this autopsy was the lack of body. An exhaustive search only rendered 2 separate pieces of his lung tissue, and I had read a very similar report prior to this one. Turns out this happens in attacks involving severe and multiple dismemberments. The lungs are buoyant because they contain many balloon-like structures. Whether the rest of the body is consumed or sinks, the lungs are most likely to be found at the surface. What's worse was this lung tissue had gone through it. In addition to the great white attack that was obviously fatal, what was left served as a potential meal for smaller, creepy creatures like a cookie-cutter shark. There were bite marks present on the lung tissue that matched up with their creepy little plunger-like mouths. The devastating case of Laci Peterson and her unborn son Connor is one of the largest modern mysteries. Her husband Scott is currently serving life for the crime, but there are still so many things that we do not know. On Christmas Eve 2002, 7.5-month pregnant Laci seemingly vanished without a trace. Her purse, wallet, and keys were left behind in her home, and the family dog was discovered alone outside. For months, exhaustive searches led to dead ends. Police suspected Scott early on due to his changing story and careless demeanor, but they didn't have any solid evidence. Then, on April 13, 2003, there was a heartbreaking development. The body of a late-term fetus was discovered on the shore of San Francisco Bay. The following day, Laci's badly decomposed body was found. Her autopsy was full of challenges because her head, neck, forearms, and left lower leg was missing. Additionally, the only internal organ remaining was her uterus. She was found with duct tape wrapped around one leg, and the only skin that remained on her body was on her left thigh. The missing body parts and postmortem changes could have been caused by water exposure, bacteria, marine life, or all of the above. The only signs of injury were 2 fractured ribs that were most likely inflicted near death. Her uterus was enlarged with the top open. This means that she was still pregnant when she died. Because Connor was found fairly well preserved, it was concluded that he died in her womb and wasn't released until her body decomposed. This most likely happened in the days before he was found. Because so much of her body was missing, the coroner could not find her cause of death. The manner was ruled a homicide due to the circumstances of how she vanished and how she was found. Still, 21 years later, we still do not know how she was killed. This is an autopsy of a woman who was murdered, and it has never left my mind. The way that her body was posed seems to be a deranged message from the killer. The victim clearly went through unspeakable horrors. What makes it worse is that her family has never received justice. This was the autopsy of Reverend Carol Faye Daniels. Her body was discovered in the sanctuary of her church in Oklahoma in August of 2009. She was in a position that many believe was meant to emulate a crucifixion, plus her hands were cut. Her entire body was doused in a caustic cleaning solution and her hair was singed from being lit on fire. She had numerous deep cuts and abrasions to both hands, face, chest, abdomen, and back. She also had long, deep, incised wounds covering her chest as well as over her throat that penetrated beyond her trachea. It was in fact so deep that on first glance, it appeared that her head had almost been severed. Unfortunately, one of the lead suspects has died, and if anyone else out there knows anything, they're not talking.